Okay, meanwhile, the other big story of the day, it is amazing. I will say America's love affair with dogs is pretty astonishing. The way that it works in the United States is that the Taliban kill a bunch of American soldiers and behead a bunch of people and take over an entire country. And Americans are like mildly upset about that or pretty upset about that. If we leave the dogs behind, that's a major issue. Okay, in similar ways. So Anthony Fauci lied about gain of function research. And he defined gain of function research as gain of function within an animal, right? Not gain of function meaning a bat virus is now transmissible among humans. He says that's not gain of function. Then there was a letter that just came out from EcoHealth Alliance admitting that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was making bat viruses transmissible to humans by testing it in mice. And so it turns out they were lying the whole time. So Anthony Fauci is out there defending himself on the charge that he lied in front of Congress.
I obviously totally disagree with Senator Paul. He's absolutely incorrect. Neither I nor Dr. Francis Collins, the director of the NIH, lied or misled about what we've done. The framework under which we have guidance about the conduct of research that we fund, the funding at the Wuhan Institute was to be able to determine what is out there in the environment in bat viruses in China.
Okay, so he's still fibbing about this. People care a lot less about this than the fact that he was experimenting on puppies. Now, isn't that a Bond villain twist? It turns out that the guy who is funding bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology for gain-of-function research, right? And this is not to suggest that Fauci funded the creation of COVID-19 specifically, because the strains of virus that were being researched under the NIH grant were different. But the guy who was funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and money is fungible, the guy who's done a horrible job throughout this pandemic while trying to control all of our lives, it turns out that also he had greenlit experimentation on puppies. Little too on the nose. The writing this year is really on the nose. I got to say, this year, so we're in season 6 now of Trump, and the writing has gotten progressively worse. Like most series, once you get past season 3, the writing really starts to collapse, and the writing this season has just been really on the nose. According to Yahoo News, Dr. Fauci is facing a demand from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to divulge information regarding the alleged use of an experimental drug on puppies. Democratic and Republican lawmakers sent a letter Friday to Joe Biden and the NIAID requesting they share information regarding the alleged infection of 44 beagle puppies with parasites in order to test an experimental drug on them, according to The Hill. The letter, written by Republican South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace and 23 other lawmakers, says, quote, "We write with grave concerns about reports of costly, cruel, and unnecessary taxpayer-funded experiments on dogs commissioned by the NIAID. Apparently, cordectomies were performed on 6 to 8-month-old dogs. Apparently, this is a devocalization. It involves splitting a dog's vocal cords in order to prevent them from barking, howling, or crying. It's opposed by the American Veterinary Medical Association and the American Animal Hospital Association. And apparently, they were requesting answers on how many drugs have been performed on dogs since the beginning of 2018. The original report is slightly more graphic. Apparently, the parasites with which they were infected were really, very, very unpleasant. Apparently, they are characterized as cruel puppy experiments. According to the White Coat Waste, they said, quote, "Our investigators show that Fauci's NIH division shipped part of $375,800 grant to a lab in Tunisia to drug beagles and lock their heads in mesh cages filled with hungry sandflies so that the insects could eat them alive. They also locked beagles alone in cages in the desert overnight for 9 consecutive nights to use them as bait to attract infectious sandflies." So basically, they were reenacting the Nicolas Cage scene from Wicker Man. Right? They're like locking the beagle's head in cages, which is just horrifying with NIH funding. It will be kind of amazing if what brings Anthony Fauci down is that he was mean to dogs, not, the 4 million dead people across the world, thanks to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and also not his complete failures during the pandemic. But Americans do love their dogs. That is for sure. Meanwhile, on the COVID front, I will admit that the Bond villains are now coming out of the woodwork. So the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, right, who is getting all sorts of plaudits for locking down her entire country, which is basically, what is the population of New Zealand? The New Zealand population is something like 5 million and like a couple million hobbits and some sheep. So she locked down her entire country. It was an island. They didn't get a big outbreak, and she was celebrated for this because, as it turns out, when you're an island with 5 million people couple million hobbits and some sheep, it's a lot easier to lock down. And then she didn't vaccinate anybody, and then there was an outbreak there anyway. So now they have vaccine passports over there that they're really pushing. And she just admits straight up that she's trying to create two classes of citizens.
So you basically see this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is. So, yep.
And she's smiling while she says, yep. If you're vaccinated, you have all these rights. If you're unvaccinated, you don't have any rights. Man, when they say the quiet part out loud and they celebrate it, it just demonstrates that if you have populations that are basically willing to concede to anything the so-called experts tell them, they will do anything to you. They will do anything to you. So long as you decide to give up liberty in favor of a little temporary safety, things tend not to work out particularly well, especially when it turns out that your experts are just lying to you, and which they are. I mean, it is amazing. Every time the experts are asked about why they got things wrong, they just have no good answer. Rochelle Walensky over at the CDC was asked over the weekend about the simple fact that everybody from Anthony Fauci to Rochelle Walensky to everybody else were like, we can't have stadiums full of people. Stadiums full of people are bad. And we've had stadiums full of people for months at this point, no major outbreaks at any of the stadiums. Walensky was asked about it, and she still won't back off the idea that it's a really bad thing.
What does it tell you that there have not been spikes in most of these communities when you have people crowded into football or baseball stadiums?
We would still encourage people who are unvaccinated to wear a mask in those situations, but given that these games are outdoors, that tends to be a much safer environment.
Well, then maybe you should have said that, but you won't, because it's about to control. It's not about fixing anything. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.